Hey, James Kingsley here to talk about how to use Firebase with Storyline. And this is in conjunction with the blog post on elearnbrothers.com. And in the first video there, we talked about the Captivate portion of it. The two work by themselves, but it's more fun when you can see how we're getting Storyline and Captivate to exchange information live and real time by using Firebase to house that information and to update it in both of them. So I'm going to jump right in here with the storyline file. And the first thing I'll show you is the variables that we're using in the storyline. So when I open that up, we can see that I've created a few more here than I did in Captivate, but we'll look at those in a minute. So if you watch the Captivate video, then you know that we already had a response 1 and a response 2 and a user count variable there. Again, I only mention that to illustrate that the code and the solution is very similar for both. You don't need Captivate to make this work, and you don't need Storyline to make this work, but I'm just trying to illustrate that the same solution works in both. So I have those three variables, and they're going to be used to track the yes and no responses, and also to display the number of people or windows that are currently open viewing the course at any given moment. And then we also have these for all the colors, blue, green, and I'll show you where those go in just a minute. So on our first slide, we have the user count being displayed, and that was the variable that we just looked at, and that's going to get updated every time a window is open for either the Captivate or the Storyline course. It will generate in Firebase another user, and we're just going to count those off and display it right here. And then we have our responses for the people that said yes and the people that said no. That's the response 1 and response 2. And we'll see how that works. But again, we're just displaying whatever number we come back with from Firebase. We're going to display that in here. And since I want people to click either yes or no, I have hotspots over this yes and no. And there's a little bit of JavaScript on those hotspots. So we have set all true, and for the other one, set all false. And you see I didn't put all the JavaScript here in the window. Sometimes I do it this way just to make my life a little bit easier because I'm pretty comfortable on the code side of things. And a lot of times when I start in a project like this, I don't know at the beginning of it how I'm going to accomplish this in the JavaScript yet. So I'll just create a function here, like a placeholder for it, and then I go, after publish, I go into the user.js file and I add that function there. So I'll show you where that is in just a moment. So that's our first slide. And if you've seen the demo, then you know that what happens is when somebody clicks yes in one window, it automatically updates every other window across the world, all over the internet, that has this particular slide open. And the same thing with the Captivate one. So you can put one window up right next to each other, have two storyline windows up, or a storyline and Captivate window, or 5 storylines and 1 Captivate window. And whenever you click either one of them, all the others will instantly be updated. And the same thing works, like I said, all over the internet. Anybody has it open. As soon as one's clicked, it updates everywhere. So that's that slide. And then the next slide, really not a lot of magic going on in Storyline, looking at the slide here. Again, we have our user count just so that we can keep track of how many people are looking at it right then. And then I have these sliders in here, and that's just the standard, insert control slider in there. I made them big and colored them a little bit. And I have those variables that we looked at for the purple, blue, yellow, red, etc. And that's where I'm going to display the number there. And that number is actually going to be the average of all the users that are currently watching at what they chose. So if 50% of the people said green and 25% said yellow, then you'll see these move around in there. And so that is misspelled, and it is controlled by the Captivate drag and drop. So on the Captivate course, we have a drag and drop where learners are going to pick their favorite color, and then we're going to see how that affects our storyline file there. Just to make sure that it all happens in Captivate there, because all we want to do here is display the information. We're going to set the information in Captivate. So to make sure that they don't accidentally slide these around here, I actually have a rectangle laid on top of these sliders just to stop the mouse from being able to click on them, because for this it's just display purpose only. We don't need the user to interact with it. All right, enough of what's in the storyline file. Let's take a look at what's in the code. So the first thing we need to do is we need to load the Firebase library, the JavaScript library. So that's in the story.html file. This is just for the Flash. If you're doing it for HTML5, then you're going to open the story_HTML5.html file. And so you would put this line in both of those there. So we're just calling the Firebase JavaScript library on that one. Then we're going to go into the user.js file. If you haven't seen that before, let me show you where that is in here. So here's our published course content. And we just took a look in the story.html. Like I said, you probably want to update the HTML5 as well to use the Firebase library. And then inside story content, there is a user.js. And this is the JavaScript file that gets loaded each time your course runs. And that's where your custom scripts go. So every time you create a trigger in Storyline to run JavaScript, it adds JavaScript to this user.js file there with it. So as you recall, I set the yes button to say set all true and the no button to say set all false. So those are included right in here. One thing to note is that these random numbers in here change every time. So you can't just overwrite one user.js file with another, because they won't get triggered because those random numbers have changed. So if you customize it, you'll just need to copy your customizations into the new user.js after you publish. Oh, and I should mention that all these files will be available on the eLearning Brothers website under the blog post. So you can download this and look at it, compare it with what I'm talking about in the video here. And I've tried to comment it as well as I could so that it would help make sense when you go through it. And go through it right now, we shall. So we begin just by setting a couple of variables. Here we have JavaScript variables, that is. We're creating an object to hold our course, and that's going to be, in this case, the storyline player, the player itself, the shell. And we're going to use that a little bit later. Since we already loaded the Firebase library, now we can start getting references to some of the objects that we want to track in Firebase. So all this stuff here is very well documented on the Firebase website. They have lots of examples. They have good documentation there. I'm going to step you through this some, but if you need more, feel free to go look at their documentation as well. So the first thing I do is I'm getting a reference to the awe object there, and that's where we're going to store the awesomeness, the yes and no's. And then I get a reference to what I'm calling the presence object, and that's how many people are present right now. And tell me a little bit about those people. We're going to save some data to each person. And then we create a reference to ourselves, and that reference is actually a push into the presence reference. So in other words, Firebase is keeping a list of everybody that's present, and we're pushing a new user into it. So as soon as this JavaScript loads, we're saying, here's another here's another user, and we're saving a reference to that user. That user is us, and we are not losers. And so then, I'll get to this part in just a second. Let's take a look at what happens when we update something in our storyline file. So the first one we can see here is we had our set awe, and we had it true or false. And so here we're deciding if it's true, then we want to add to the yes, and if it's false, we want to add to the no column. think about it as columns in the database or an Excel spreadsheet, if you will. The beauty is we don't really even need to care how that data is organized because Firebase is going to take care of all that for us. So all we need to do is tell Firebase that we want to add 1 to whatever the current value is. So first thing we do is we get our reference to our object. We grab either the yes or no object, that's the child in there, and then we say add 1 to that. Now I do have just a little bit of extra code in here, an if else in there, because in theory there could be no yeses or nos in either column right now. And so in which case it's not just 0, it hasn't even been created yet. Because that's the way Firebase works, is we could create any object we wanted in there, and until we create it, there's nothing there. So what we're saying here is if the current data in that column, if you will, yes or no, is null, in other words, if it doesn't even exist yet, then just set it to 1. We're just going to make that 1 there. But if it does exist, then we're going to add 1 to whatever's already there. Now, on the other end of that, in all the other windows, Firebase is going to notify them that that value has changed. It's going to notify all those windows that the object has new information in it. And so here's where it does that. We have our reference to our object, and we tell Firebase that when the value changes, we want to run this code. And in our case, what the code we're going to run is we're going to update the course with the value of yes and the value of no. And remember these response 1 and response 2, those were in the storyline course. So those are the 2 variables that we're going to set the count of either yes or no. And the reason why I'm using this update course is because I'm trying to normalize the code across all these different projects and tools. So Storyline, Captivate, Lectora, all the tools have, well, most tools have a way to get and set the data from outside the course using JavaScript. And the syntax and how you do it changes a little bit from course to course. So in order to keep as much of my code the same for across all my different platforms, I just create this update course function, which we can scroll down here and I'll show it to you. And that function changes depending on if it's Storyline or Captivate or whatever. So in this case, this is to update Storyline, so I'm using setVar. So my update course that I called above said to update a particular variable and to give it this value. So here I can just say grab the course, set the variable. We're going to set response 1 to 2,528, whatever the number is. I have wrapped that in this try catch, and that's sort of it's a JavaScript way of saying, hey, let's give this a shot. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And that's nice because sometimes when you try something in code and it's broken, then it can crash the whole thing and lock up the page, and nothing else is going to work from that point on. So in this case, we're saying, give it a try. If it doesn't work, then let's try something else. And what I'm doing is I'm just setting a timer, and I'm saying, let's wait a half a second, 500 milliseconds, and we'll try doing that again. And my assumption is if it didn't work the first time, it's because we don't have the player. We haven't asked the Storyline to give us access to the player yet. And so I set a timer and I say, let's get that player and update the course after a half a second. And so then it'll loop through this and keep trying it every half a second until it has it all. Most of the time it's going to work fine. The most frequent case in this situation where it's not going to work is that user count variable is going to be available to us in our JavaScript right away. So as soon as this page loads, Firebase is going to tell us, hey, there's 1,000 users, right? And we're going to try to tell Storyline to update that variable to 1,000 users. But if Storyline's not ready yet, it's still loading, then we're going to get an error message. So that's the main reason for the try catch here. Now, coming back up to look at some of these other ones, that I sort of skimmed by before, is we had our preference value in here, and or I'm sorry, our presence object in here. And here we are watching that object, and we're saying that when it updates, we want to mark ourselves as online. So in other words, earlier we added ourselves to it. So not only do we want to add ourselves, we're creating this this custom variable in Firebase to mark ourselves as online there. Then we also are going to tell Firebase that when we disconnect, in other words, when it no longer senses our presence anymore, we've stopped talking to it, then we want to remove ourselves from the list. So if there's 10 people in the list and we join, now there's going to be 11. We play with the example for a while, we leave, it's going to drop back down to 10 because of that. Firebase would be smart enough to figure that out. Let's see here. We have, this is where we're getting the count of how many people are currently have a window open. I keep referring to it as people, and you can do that in Firebase. You can make sure that each person's unique, or you can make sure that, like by using logins or some kind of identity, that I'm only counted once, even if I got 10 windows open. In our demo, every window counts as a person. So if you personally have 10 windows open on your computer, that's going to show up as 10 users in there. But what we're doing here is we're telling Firebase that when that user count changes, when the value of that changes, again, we want to run this function, and that function basically just counts how many people are online. So we're saying however many people you have on the list, update our course with the user count. Now, something different in this one than was in the Captivate one is we're also going to update their favorite color in here. So in the Captivate one, we were telling Firebase, so in the Captivate one, there's a drag and drop, and they choose their color. So let's say they chose red. In that case, we marked that in that window, that person said their favorite color was red. So here, we're telling it that whenever anybody updates their color or the number of people, we want to run these functions here. And so we're updating our course count in Storyline, but we also need to update those colors. So all those little bars that I had in there, those sliders, we need to update that. So I run this custom function that I created where I have my list of colors. First, I set them all to 0 just to make sure we're starting at scratch, because if people have left, we want to make sure that we re-average the numbers. So we set everything to 0. Then I create a variable just to count how many people have voted, because there can be users that didn't vote. They might be on the first slide, or maybe they're looking at the second slide, but they haven't voted yet. So we're going to use this to count each person. Then for every person that's in that snapshot of data that we got from Firebase, we're going to loop through and find their favorite color. So we get their color, whatever color they chose. Now, like I said, they might be on slide 1 or they're on slide 2 and they haven't picked a color yet. So if they haven't picked a color, well, let me reverse that. If they have picked a color, then we count their vote. We say there's one person that voted on a color, and then we do some math here or I'm sorry, this isn't the math yet. Basically, we're just adding to the color count. We're saying that whatever color they said, blue. So here's our color count up here, this array. So if they said blue, then right here we would say color count blue equals either 1 or plus 1, because it might be the first loop through, and so you can't add 1 right away. So we're adding 1 to that color every time if they voted for that color. If they didn't pick a color, we don't do anything. We just keep going. We don't count them, and we don't add their color here. Now, once we're done looping, right, and we're going to check to see if there were any votes. So here we say if there were votes. In other words, if at least one person voted for a favorite color, then we're going to loop through those colors, and we're going to calculate the percentage. And that's just, figuring out how many people voted for red out of how many people voted altogether. And then we update Storyline, the blue variable in this case, let's say, with that percentage that we came up with. So we're going to loop through every one of the colors here, green, yellow, blue. We're going to calculate that percentage and update Storyline with it. Then, If nobody voted, in other words, there was less than one, so there were 0 people that voted for a color, then we're going to go through all those colors and we're going to update storyline with a value of 0 just to make sure that all our sliders go back to 0 there. So that's basically how most of the JavaScript in here. Like I said, feel free to download the files. Come back to the eLearn Brothers website, the blog, and you can grab the files. You can watch the Captivate video. And even if you're not working in Captivate, it's probably a good idea to look at the video and look at the JavaScript in that example as well, so you can kind of see how we did things a little bit different there. Because, like I said, in one we're sending data, and the other we're getting some data back and forth there. Thanks, and we'll see you at the blog.